Yep.
All right. So I'm looking at Terry, and so I'm gonna talk to Terry because I can't see any of you. Um, as Pat said, I have worked with nonprofits for a long time. And when I hit my legal consequences, I thought, I'm never going to be able to do the work that I love again. And what I found in getting involved with Parsol and Narsol and all the other affiliate organizations is that I'm able to use those decades of experience, many of which who I spent in Arizona. I worked for a nonprofit consultant firm out of Flagstaff, working in Flagstaff, Prescott, Sedona, Yuma, um, Greater Phoenix area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've been to Castles and Coasters and to the Pie restaurant on 17. So Arizona may be one of my favorite places to visit. And maybe not live there looking at some of your
Yeah.
laws that you're trying to fight. So I just want to introduce myself a little bit. That way, we're going to talk tonight about some messaging, storytelling, strategy, and language. Um, I know this is a fearless group. I know it's affiliated with Arizona RSOL, and so one of the things that we are all here to do, or all do, is some advocacy work and advocating for assorted different things. And I'm here to tell you that the language that we use around what we advocate for changes with what we're advocating for and who we're talking to. There are four, at least off the top of my head, four types of advocacy work that we do in the rational sexual offense laws movement. That is, the first is lobbying. That is changing conditions by changing the laws, by advocating to elected officials who have the ability to influence change in the laws that are passed in the state legislature. Um, Also tied to that, if the governor's office, because the governor will have to sign a bill into law, and so that level of advocacy. The second area is policy work, and that's working with leaders who are not elected, and they are typically your career in the business. We call them policy wonks, and they would be your secretary of corrections, secretary of health, etc., and all the people that work in those state offices. And why is that important? It's because those people work usually in the executive branch of government under the governor, and they can change conditions that are non-legislative. So if one of the things the Pennsylvania Prison Society just released today is a report on the terrible food and nutritional conditions in our state prisons. And so that's not something that there's a law for. That's something that somebody at the policy level decides. There's no law that says this is what the meal schedule should be or the content of the meal. That's something that somebody at the Department of Corrections makes a decision, what the menus are going to be, what the budget's going to be, all of that. So that's the policy work. The third is litigation, and that is working through the court system to challenge an unfair or unconstitutional law. I think, we're not supposed to preach to the choir at fearless meetings, but I think we can all agree that the registry is an unconstitutional law. At least that's how we look at it. And then the fourth area of advocacy is public relations. And that really is the story that we tell. The goal of public relations is to change the public perceptions. And we do that through storytelling, story development, strategy, understanding who we need to talk to. And there's an absolutionist point of view in this movement, and then there's an incremental point of view in this movement. The realists in the room will say we would love to have all of this registry, all of the unfair conditions in our broken criminal justice system resolved, but we're more realists usually. And that means we'll take that incremental approach. We'll take what we can get in a lot of ways, but a lot of that is doing that strategy. One of the things that we need to do is look at audience development. And if you've ever worked in the arts, audience development is getting more butts in the seat for the symphony concert, or more people in the theater for the play, or more people to buy the music on iTunes or listen to them on Spotify or something. For us, audience development kind of gets confused because if you ask people in this movement, what is your audience? Their answer is typically, well, we want to change public perception. Well, what part of everybody? We're going to change the entire, we're going to change everybody's view, and we're looking for a silver bullet to do it. Which is another pie in the sky. Ooh, Arizona has lots of pie references. Pie in the sky view, but not necessarily realistic. And so we need to break that audience into a couple different groups. And I put together a single slide. Let's see if I can put it up on the screens there in the room. Are you seeing it? There we go. All right. So our audience are the base. Our audience are the base. That's everyone in this room. That's everyone who is affected directly and through collateral consequences and indirectly by sex offense laws in Arizona or the federal laws. And so that's your base, that's your choir that you're preaching to. Now, within the base, you're going to have a couple divisions. You're going to have the absolutionists. We get all the time, it's great that you've got rid of the registry for some people, but if you don't get rid of the whole thing all at once, we're out. And so we've got that. You've got the realist incrementalist people. And you've got, I would break the base down into the people that get it because they understand it, and the people that get it because they feel it. Okay, so you're going to have people that in your base that know it's wrong because my son, my husband, my brother, my sister, whatever, is on the registry, and we can see these consequences, but they don't necessarily get all of the background, all the information. They just know it's wrong, it's hurting their loved one, and that. Then you have the people who do all of the opposite side where of the spectrum. They all, they've read all of the research, they know all of the laws, they spend all of their time doing this. And then you've got the people in the middle. So that's an audience that has subdivisions. Okay, the persuadables, the people who get it but need more information, or they can be, they're not stuck in this one position. They can be persuaded. The other people that I forgot to list on here is your opposition. Okay, and it's kind of interesting. I've done a lot of work with different types of organizations. I've done work with LGBTQ plus organizations, and you've got LGBTQ advocacy organizations, and then you have anti-LGBTQ organizations. In most places in the United States, those are faith-based, usually Catholic Church-based organizations that that if you try to run a bill to uh, criminal add protections around employment, housing, discrimination for LGBTQ folks, that this other organization is going to come back at you. In our movement, it's kind of difficult because we don't have, like, there's no, I don't think there's an Arizona organization for irrational sexual offense laws, is there? No.
Yep.
We have
One person, yep.
person.
Yeah. So you might have that, but that's not an organization, and so you're better organized, you have more support, you hopefully have more money, you have more influence, than just one crazy person. In Pennsylvania, we have like the crazy moms who want to pass residency restrictions because people shouldn't live within within 1,000 or 2,500 feet of a school, which would mean no one with a sex offense could live in the cities of Harrisburg, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Scranton, Erie. You'd be sending them off to the country, which is kind of what that group wants. But there's not another organization you can go against. We're fighting decades and decades of fear mongering, misinformation, etc. And so part of the solution to that and changing that public opinion audience is evidence. The biggest terms, I was just at the Criminal Justice Advisory Board conference for Pennsylvania, and the biggest word in criminal justice reform and whatnot in Pennsylvania is evidence-based policy. And so Parcel went back and changed all of our language to include evidence-based policy as our solution to this. And what we can say is, so in Pennsylvania, Governor Ridge signed the Megan's Law, sex offense law, registry law into effect in 1995. Well, it's almost 2025. So we say that's almost 30 years ago. And was it a good law at the time? No. Was it the best they could come up with what the information they had? Yes, it actually was. But what we've learned is over the last 30 years, through research, through evidence-based practices, through testing, through all of this stuff. I know you've got some great speakers coming to the conference there that are going to talk about these practices. We have 30 years of information. We also have 30 years of information that shows that individuals that commit sexual offenses have the lowest reoffense rate in Pennsylvania. That's less than 5%. If you only use child sexual abuse materials or child pornography cases, that rate is 2%, 2.25%. And so we know, we have lots of evidence now that we have studied over the last 30 years. And so one of the language pieces that we like to use here in Pennsylvania is 30 years, the 30-year rule. And so over 30, so Parcel is going to have a campaign next year in 2025 because it'll be 30 years. And that campaign looks like in 2020 or in 1995, the average internet connection speed was a 33.6 kilobit modem that you dialed up with to America Online. What's changed? And just using that example, what's changed? I'm connected on a 2 gigabit connection. So 36. So I'm on a connection 5 155,555 times faster and more stable than that connection 30 years ago. And why? Because technology has advanced. We've learned how to streamline things. We've learned how to do things better. Well, so has the treatment of people who sexually offend, and so has the treatment and prevention of sexual offense and sexual harm in the United States. And what we do is we back that up with the data, and I'll get to that in a second. Your next audience is the decision makers. That's your lobbying and your policy work. And then your influencers. That's you. That's ACRSOL. That's the other organizations that you might partner with. If you've got a prison society, if you've got a criminal mandatory minimums organization, if you've got any other criminal justice or civil rights organizations, we've started to look at data from the ACLU a lot, because we know that taking away people's rights, which is what the registry and these laws do, is a violation of their civil rights. And people can, the general public, quote unquote, is a lot more sympathetic and a lot more willing to listen to people when they talk it to things through a lens of civil rights issues, because we've had discrimination against LGBTQ people and people of color and immigrants and all of that stuff. So let me kill this and come back to you. So those are your different audiences. We just had a very successful lobby day in Harrisburg, and I'm going to, let's see, 1 second. So how we approach our lobbying is we set up meetings with decision makers on the Hill in Harrisburg, and we used a very specific meeting format. That meeting form, if you've ever heard of VPSA as a communication method, that's what this is loosely based on, and that is value, problem, solution, and action. And how we've approached this is we talk about a shared value. And so what's the purpose of the registry, or what would registry advocates say the purpose is? Well, it's to keep our communities safe. Okay. Anybody here not agree that that's a good thing? Shared value. Pretty much everybody's going to share that value. There's a fun story about an organization. It's a very controversial organization. Some people are very supportive. Some people rally against it. But if you go back, I don't know, 20 years, their mission statement was, every child should be a wanted child. Anybody know what the organization is?
NAMBLA.
What is it? What did you say? Planned Parenthood?
Planned Parenthood.
Is that right?
Yeah, Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood's mission was something that I think pretty much everybody would agree with. Every child should be a wanted child. And then they get into the other stuff. But when you start from a position of a shared value, you get people on the same page with you right away. Now, I'm not saying they're going to stay on the same page with you, but it's a way to start the conversation. So we say, let me read it from my screen. We share a responsibility for each other and for the common good. We all grow and change over time and need a chance to start over when things go wrong. To foster redemption, we must provide conditions that allow people to develop, rebuild, and reclaim full responsibility for their lives. We say that because that's the number one step toward anti-recidivism, is claiming responsibility for your actions. And so we are not here to say that people don't need to be disciplined for their actions if they've done something wrong. We are here to say that the current laws go way too far. And so we continue. For persons with a history of criminal sexual behavior, that includes coming to terms with their past actions, again, reinforcing that, and ensuring safeguards are in place to not reoffend. So that gets into, well, isn't that the registry? That's what that's for. No. Yet our constituents are faced with misleading, inaccurate, and untruthful statements about themselves on a daily basis, which stand in the way of progress and even at times basic human needs. So we're saying this isn't working. And then they get to the part of, well, okay, now, so what are you trying to say? And then I say, well, before I continue, and then we in our lobbying meetings have somebody who can tell their story, and we've coached them and worked with them on how to tell a story. And that introduction goes something like this. I want to introduce Lisa. She works here in Harrisburg to find lasting solutions for the unsheltered daily, including those with sexual offenses who have the greatest need to find hope when they are so often dehumanized because of their past. Lisa, would you share your story with us? And so I'm setting this speaker up to be a superhero from the very beginning. So when she starts to talk, it kind of fakes out the person in the room that she's going to talk about working with people that have great need because of their criminal past. What we get is, one, reinforcing that they do good to help the community. So they say, as John mentioned, I work every day to ensure our communities unhoused have safe places to sleep at night, including a proportionally high number of people on the registry who can't find landlords willing to rent to someone on, quote, the list, unquote. Then we have her describe, without specific details, how she got on the list herself. And she says, well, as a minor, I was all too familiar with the registry, as I am a survivor of sexual assault, not by a stranger, but by my own father. Unmanaged substance use led to my father to a very dark place. And although I advocated for treatment and unification, court orders made that impossible. And court orders and registry shame kept us both from healing for years, until his continued substance use led to an early death. So now they know she is personally affected by someone who sexually harmed her, not by a stranger. We try to get rid of the stranger danger myth, but by her father. So that is the next step of the story. Then we say, but generational trauma is a thing. And as an adult, I found myself with severe mental health diagnoses, including multiple suicide attempts, major substance use issues, and a criminal record that landed me on the registry myself. So now she's on the registry. So that's what they call in drama, in popular television, the plot twist. So we do that. And you know, if someone's taking notes, they always look up at that point. That's what we want. And then she says, not only does that put my master's degree to no use because I can't get a job in my field, but my employer had to hire an attorney to create special accommodations to protect our agency from harm in a time where a employer can be, quote, canceled because they hire someone on this list. So that says that ties to economic development, workforce development, jobs. Okay. Then we say, but by my registry status doesn't only affect me. We get into collateral consequences here. Imagine the heartbreak my husband still lives with because he didn't get to walk his daughter down the aisle because his ex-wife said that put up barriers to our participation in his daughter's wedding. Now, that ties it to something very personal for most people. Most people want their kids to go off and get married and to walk them down the aisle if they're a girl, or to stand with them if they're male or whatever. So we've made that connection. And then we say, and for me, and again, this language is specifically putting the person you're talking to in your shoes. Imagine having to have conversations with your kids about how to respond when their peers at school bully them and exclude them because their mom is a monster, even though you're not a monster and your kids only know you as mom. So we're now making an emotional connection, making that connection there. And then we do our 30-year thing. So it's been 30 years since Governor Tom Ridge signed Megan's Law. And with that, all of the empirical research on best evidence-based practice that show that the registry not only doesn't work, but does more harm than good, including the added trauma of the collateral consequences I related. What we do have is 3 decades of practices that show not just how to treat those who have caused sexual harm, but to prevent this harm in the first place. They want to thank you for letting me tell my story. And, you know, in the day of these meetings on the Capitol, I think we had a couple people wipe away tears. So we've made a real connection to these people who can change, who can institute change. And then it comes back to me, the data nerd, that says, Lisa's right, it's been 30 years. And then I use the number to throw some other numbers at you. And I say, some other important numbers, and then I make the joke, they're worth writing down. 93% of individuals who experienced sexual harm knew the person harming them. It was not some random stranger that lived next door. It was not some random person that broke in off the street like the original stories of Megan's Law or Jacob Wetterling or Adam Walsh had, that these bills were created to protect. That's not who is actually affected by these laws. So we say that. Then we say the other interesting fact that you may not know is more than a third, and more than a third of sexual offenses against minors are committed by other minors. And we say, you know, again, 30 years ago, would we know the word sexting? Probably not. But today, and then if I'm telling the story, I get real, like, I don't want to say graphic, but I get real with them. And I say, you know, so if you got a computer in your pocket, and I wave my cell phone and I say, and you're 16 years old, and you take a picture of yourself that you shouldn't be taking, and you send it to your girlfriend, and she sends it to her friends, well, now you have created child pornography. You have distributed child pornography. Your girlfriend has received child pornography knowingly because she's then sent it to her girlfriends who have now, so she is distributed, and now the other people have received it, and you've got a dozen teenagers in legal trouble that could possibly follow them for the rest of their lives. We know plenty of examples of people who cannot go to college because they're not allowed on a campus that might have minors. And that's really effective when we have professors with us, because we have a number of college professors that help us with our lobbying efforts because they are experts in this field. And that also kind of, it's like that you see them writing stuff down frantically, because we want to use the time we're given to the maximum. And so we don't go in and say, blah, 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 here's a bunch of facts. We make those facts the most impactful, biggest number, 93%. And then we say, when we talk about recidivism, we say your own joint legislative caucus commissioned a report that by the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency that will tell you that sexual offenses have the lowest recidivism rate of any crime tracked in this state. Your own Department of Corrections will tell you the recidivism rate for sexual offenses is the lowest of any crime that they track. So this whole like frightening and high thing is a myth and is not solid information to base your legislation on. And that's usually how we leave it. They ask some questions, whatnot. But that is kind of the story format that we use. And it's very, very, very effective. Again, it's based on the value, problem, solution, action. And then we give them this, and this is a front and back sheet. I'm gonna pull up here. Let me see if I can pull this up. There we go. So we have specific requests that we make, and this goes usually to the third person in our meeting. Usually it's our legislative director or someone on that committee. And we say, so, and this is the action. This is what these decision makers can do. We can say, one, sexual harm is a preventable public health issue, not a criminal justice response. Our goal is to prevent sexual harm. Well, you can't do that if 99% of the work that comes out of this building, the Capitol, or if you're talking to other people, which you may on this topic, that people at the Capitol say 99% is a criminal justice response. It's not about prevention. They're not doing anything to prevent this. The registry doesn't work, and that's what they think they're doing to prevent it, but we know it doesn't. We talk about the data. We talk about age-appropriate sexual harm education. We're not talking about age-appropriate sex education. We're talking about sexual harm education. And there's lots of research out there on that topic about what's the appropriate thing to say to someone from kindergarten to high school. So we do that. We say, we need you to base upcoming legislation and policy on evidence-based solutions. There's that buzzword again. And Pennsylvania has a court case in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that's probably going to come down and overturn the registry for a fifth time. And we say that, and that's another number, that you're going to have a chance sometime this year to rewrite this legislation for a freaking sixth time. Can you get it right, please? And base it on evidence-based solutions. We have a a different sheet we hand them on specific registry things. We know we're not going to get them to get rid of the registry in Pennsylvania. We know that's not realistic. What we can do is make it a non-public registry. We can give people a way off the registry if they are offense-free for X number of years. We cannot put juveniles on the registry. We can, or if they are, it's on a separate registry that they get off automatically after a certain amount. So we have all these other solutions, but we don't talk about them with them. We just give them this, and then we give them this other sheet to read later. And if they ask, that's our door to continue the conversation. Our next point, stop excluding people with sex crimes from support. Every single criminal justice reform bill that has come through Pennsylvania has, unless you're a person, unless you're on the registry. We had a major bill that all of the criminal justice organizations are cheering about as a huge victory, and that's not automatically reincarcerating someone who has a technical violation of their parole or probation, unless they're on the registry. And a technical violation might be that they screwed up their registry paperwork, or they showed up a day or two late to register than what was supposed to be. Pennsylvania has a weird law that, like, you have a 10-day window every period to register. Sometimes it's the 1st to the 10th. Sometimes it's the 31st to the 9th. So we look at that. We talk about trauma. I'll get to that and I'll come back to that. And then we use current and person first terminology, which is something you've probably all heard. I know fearless groups, the NARSOL affiliates all try to use person first terminology, unless you're specifically referring to a law or a statute that has the term sex offender in it. You don't want to do that because we don't want to put that as a label on someone. That's not their identity. That is, something in the past that they're hopefully moving past. And so we say person with a history of sexual offense, person forced to register, if we're talking specifically about the registry, or the new term is person with a crime of a sexual nature. And that's important for someone who's not yet on the registry when we're talking about sentencing reform, or we're talking about those laws. We don't use child pornography anymore if we can help it. We say child sexual abuse or child sexual exploitation materials, CSAM. That is a clinical thing that the mental health field, psychology, psychiatry have changed to sociology. And it's also something that a lot of legislation has changed. Pennsylvania's passing laws now to change all of their use of child pornography to child sexual abuse materials. That and the final thing that we've trying to change is we want to say survivor and not a victim. Attorneys, prosecutors will use the term victims because it's got a negative connotation. By saying the term survivor, you're saying your life is, again, more than the abuse you suffered or the harm you suffered. You're a survivor and you can move on from that and have a fulfilling, joyful life. So those were our requests. They were all fairly well received. And the co-chair of the Pennsylvania Progressive Caucus was so moved by our conversation that she arranged for us to speak. This past Monday, we spoke to the House Progressive Caucus, which was 14 or 15 legislators that we wouldn't normally just get a meeting with. And instead of getting a meeting with their chief of staff or their legislative director, we got to talk to them directly. I want to show, this is the Parsol website, and we've taken these over the last week, actually, and we've added an Our Issues tab. And so when we talk about sexual harm being a public health issue, we paste our statement from that other document here. Then we include additional resources from known and respected sources. And so from the CDC, we have information on this page. When we talk about ineffective registries, we have a NARSAL white paper, we have news articles, we have an excellent video on the topic that talks specifically about registries and the harm that they actually do from a PhD therapist expert. And when we talk about, what's another good one? Recidivism rates. Not only, this is my favorite part. And I published an article last year that says, thanks Pennsylvania for proving us right. And that article talked about how the Pennsylvania DOC showed parolees with sexual offenses have the lowest rearrest rates. Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency showed a 3.8 rearrest rate, of which half of those were because of a registry violation. So cut that in half, you get our 2.25 statistic, United States Sentencing Commission, and then we specifically link to the reports from PCCD. So if somebody really wants the data, which people don't really want the data, but if someone really wanted the data, they could go here to get it. Let's see. The other thing that we have started to do is look at this as a civil rights issue. And the number one fundamental civil right in America has always been a representative democracy and the right to vote. And so we are doing a survey for the state of our list, because we have a lot of re-entrants on our list, that shows that 20% of people forced to register cannot go to their polling place because they're at a school or too close to a playground or in a public library or something like that. And 56% were told that they could not vote. And of those, 10% were told that by their parole or probation officer. So boom, we're saying to people, here's the data from our survey. And so as we do that, it again creates a new narrative that this is not a criminal justice issue. This is a civil rights issue. This is a prevention issue. And people should approach it from that standpoint. How do we have that conversation outside the Capitol? It's using any of this information, any of these stories, to get support. Those persuadables, you want them to become part of your choir so you can preach to them, right? So you want those people that are the swingable votes, we would say in politics, right? Or the persuadables to move. We want to change public opinion. And from a marketing standpoint, we want our name on everything. So I know you're doing the sponsored content in the newspaper. Make sure those all say for more information, your website address, because you might get a half a dozen people reading that to go to your website and sign up for your email list. We have had so many people see us in something like that, join our website. Like my first week working with Parsol, I was monitoring the donations, and we would get like a $250 donation coming in from someone who we never knew. And then it becomes a phone call to them to continue that conversation and continue to build up their giving, but understand their story. And everybody who gets involved in this has a story of why it's important to them. And so when I look at some of the things that you all have put together as far as stories, the stories are important, but if we approach them in that format of shared value, but there's a problem with how this works, and the solution is to do it differently, and 30 plus years of research have shown us how to do it, will you please use that instead of fear and myths to move forward and help us? And that's really how that ask is the most effective. So, did we get any questions? I see no questions.
Any questions? I'll pick up. Got it? Vicky's got it. Vicky's collecting them.
Okay.
This is-
Speaking of Vicky and I serve on a NARSOL related task force, and we are working to identify a public relations firm to help everybody tell stories better and influence the right people and make changes. And part of the whole lobbying piece is finding people in every legislative district who are affected by the registry and sex offense laws. So, you know, a legislator is more willing to sit down with someone who can actually vote for them. So we want to do that. Oh, a question. Do other states reflect the same low recidivism of Pennsylvania? I can't say that for sure. Federally, it's still a very low recidivism rate. There's information on that by the office, by the Department of Justice has a lot of information about recidivism rates. But every state has a DOC that tracks this stuff. Every state has our equivalent of a commission on crime and delinquency that tracks this stuff. It's just getting to the right people there. Going to we're going to a ton of conferences this year, so we have a seat at the table with those people. We got the PCC data because I went to a workshop at this criminal justice conference, and PCCD was had representatives there. And I sat down with their data guy and I'm like, what does it look like if you just look at sex offense laws and recidivism? And he got on his computer and we're, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, here's this. Well, can you email that to me? Sure. So now we have PCCD data. Another story factor that I want to share that works really well is the use of the current national epidemic against overdoses and substance misuse. I used this at this conference because we heard keynote speakers, mostly people who were addicted to opiates and drugs and alcohol, and they told their story about, you know, I was in the gutter, I was living on the street pushing a shopping cart of stuff, hadn't showered for 3 weeks, blah, 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 blah. Now I am the CEO of a major corporation. We employ 150 people, so on and so forth. And everybody stood up and cheered for that person. They told their story of trauma. They talked about how their father was a wonderful person, and when he passed away, their mother couldn't handle living alone, so she remarried someone who abused him. And the line is, you get people on that story, and I say, well, what if your childhood trauma leads you, instead of self-soothing and self-medicating yourself with alcohol and drugs, you turn to compulsive sexual activities and pornography. And like someone who starts with one drug ultimately often progresses, someone who starts drinking beer moves on to hard liquor. What if they moved on from what we would call adult legal pornography to something less legal? Said that to the head of the Pennsylvania Parole Board, said that to the executive director of Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, and it was like they had never considered that, and their jaw dropped. And now I have their cell phone numbers, and they're willing to work with us on reform. So sometimes meeting people with a narrative they're very familiar with and doing that plot twist works. Let's see.
I just wanted to comment, I believe Arizona recidivism is 2.8%. So, whoever asked the question, we have the list of recidivism rates.
Yeah, and it's important to compare those to other recidivism rates. If you can say that's the lowest recidivism rate of any crime in the state, that's a really powerful thing to say. If you can compare that to drug crimes or whatnot, that is that, and if you can clarify that the recidivism rate is for reoffense in a sexual offense and not reoffense by, for example, a survival crime, because we have a lot of survival crime on the registry. Can't get a job, can't get a house, living homeless, so I'm going to steal food so I can eat. Things like that. Establishment of levels. So one of the things that we do is we say a person who commits a crime of a sexual nature has to go through a dozen risk assessments, has to go through significant treatment. And we say, don't you think those treatment providers and those assessments are a better determination of a person's risk than anybody who has a CSAM offense should be on this tier for 25 years, and everybody who has this kind of offense should be on this tier for life. So we try to shift that away, and that is a big component of the court case in Pennsylvania, is that they said, how can you group people like this and have that be legal and not a violation of the separate but equal doctrines. Punitive probation attitudes. That is something that is difficult in Pennsylvania because every county has its own rules. As far as state probation and parole, we work on that. That is that part of it. Parole is part of the Department of Corrections, and we have friends at the top of that leadership. So we're having conversations about those things, specifically around parole and probation restrictions that prevent people with sex crimes from getting back on their feet, because you can't get it. And we say, can you get a job without using a computer in 2024? No, but our restrictions say you're not allowed to use computers. Things like that. And so we're trying to change some of those. Manufacturing criminals. We have used some of that language and some of that work as part of our advocacy work, especially when we're talking about the DOC and how, and PCCD, the data place in the state, just came out with a new report that said people who are incarcerated for, quote, too long, or with people with crimes that they did not also commit at the same level, come out of incarceration with they basically go to criminal school to learn how to survive, and then end up committing those survival offenses that I mentioned. So people are receptive to that. When this report comes out and is finalized, we will definitely be taking more of that approach. Conservatives versus progressives. So progressives are going to be on board with, let's not continue to do the same thing we've always done if it doesn't work. That is the number one progressive value. The conservative side, we talk about the cost of the registry and that it doesn't work. We tell them it doesn't work. They get, okay, so it's not the best. They may say it works if it protects one child. And then we say, well, you're spending $8 million on this, where you're spending $4 million to maintain the website registry database, let alone the police time, the enforcement time, all of that. If you're on the registry, you get a letter every time you have to register, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. There's 24,000 people on the registry. How much is that costing in postage and things like that? And we show them, okay, now an effective sexual risk treatment program in Pennsylvania costs $25,000. And they say, okay, how many people could you send through that treatment program and put on an appropriate level of supervision and treatment? The cost in Pennsylvania to civilly commit someone with a sex crimes exceeds, I want to say, $300,000 per person per year. So when we look at that and we say, this program that you all support because you haven't changed it, is costing 400 million, however many $1 million that turns out to be. So conservatives, we talk about cost, we talk about it doesn't work, we talk about there's a better solution. Progressives, we talk about it doesn't work, it hasn't worked, there's lots of evidence to say it doesn't work. Evidence-based practices is a progressive value, so let's focus on that. Interesting other thing we've figured out with the Progressive Caucus is things like restorative justice is a big thing in the progressive side. And so if we talk about that, and Lisa tells her story, which is because of this thing, the court order and the registry, I wasn't allowed to have restorative justice. I couldn't hear my father's remorse or talk to him for decades, and then he died, and that trauma doesn't heal as well. It may not heal at all because there was no way to do that. So I'll press to put the other slide up. There you go. Take a picture.
That's exactly what he's doing, John.
Got it?
Yep.
And then I'll put up this other. These are the 4 lobbying types I talked about. Advocacy types.
Well, I think everyone's handed in all their questions, and you know, I could see from, you can't see their reactions, but I can tell you from their reactions,
Lots of notes.
what,
Taking notes.
and lots of notes, as Terry's saying. This really was, well received, and we can't thank you enough for being on the call with us tonight.
Of course, and I will send you those story templates. So you can distribute those as you like.
Is will we have access to the handout you showed?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that, John. Thanks again, okay?
All right, everyone, have a good night and keep on.
Take care.
Take care. We'll see some.
Bye-bye.
We'll see
Bye-bye.
some of you in Atlanta, I think. So.
I hope
Okay.
so. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Well,